I'm going to educate you. You and anybody else that's seen Bigfoot did not see Bigfoot. They saw Cain, from Cain and Abel. Danny's trying to laugh. This is people's lives. These are people's lives, and I'm just going to pretend it wasn't mine. But this is kind of it's kind of church lore, but it's based in some comments that some of the leaders of the church made back in the day. And as the story goes, Bigfoot is a Mormon. So just so you know.
All right. Welcome, Jake. Although you go by Jake, but we'll start right away with the name. So, the Church of Latter-day Saints has also given you a different name. What's the story there?
They have, and they would be. I would not be a good member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints if I had to give them the credit of their whole name. So, it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormon, and who have named me Moses. Secretly named me Moses, and it's pretty fascinating. I'm sure we can get into it, but yeah, that's my secret. It's called a new name, and everybody that goes to the Mormon temple gets one. And nobody, if you're a good Mormon, ever tells anybody on the planet what it is.
Wow. Cool. I, as many of the listeners, have a very superficial knowledge of the church, so you're here to set us straight on a lot of stuff. In the same neighborhood as my school in Finland, actually, there was a Mormon church. And if you think the name of the church in English is a mouthful, you should see it in Finnish. It barely fits on the side of the building.
I bet that's yeah. I've heard stuff like that before. Yeah, it barely fits on the building in English, as bad as it is. So I can only imagine.
So the secret name is meant to be your name to get into heaven, right?
Yeah, I mean it's what you're kind of told. I mean the Mormon temple is really nobody really talks much about it outside of the temple because you're not supposed to. They say it's sacred what happens in there, which is really just a religious word for secret. So you don't learn a lot about what goes on in temples when you're growing up, just kind of vaguely, and you don't really learn a lot about what goes on in temples when you get older either. The only way to really learn is by going there, and you don't really talk about it outside of there. But one of the things that you do is, there's a couple. They call them tokens and covenants and whatnot, but they're things that you've got to do. You're kind of like simulating. You're simulating death when you're about to meet, God on the other side or Jesus on the other side. And so that's kind of what's going on in the temple. But part of that process is they give you your own special, unique. They call it a new name, and you treat it like it's almost like a password to get into heaven. And when you go to the temple, it's almost like practice for when you die. But yeah, the name is really cool. I mean, Moses was mine, and if there's Mormons out there right now that hear me talking about it, they're saying I'm apostate because you are never supposed to talk about it. And I never told anybody what it was until about 8 or 9 years ago. So my whole life I kept that a secret. You get a name. It's not said outright, but the sense is that it's kind of like the name that you might go by in the next life, or maybe it's a name that you went by before this life, or it's a religious name that is assigned to you. And mine was Moses, and I can't think of a cooler name to have than Moses, but it turns out that it's all a farce in the end. So the really cool secret name, special name is just I don't know. You get in a line and you just kind of pull out of the hat.
Yeah. So you're an ex-Mormon. You got out of the church, which related to your son coming out as gay, and you started becoming disillusioned with the church. But to start from a little bit from the beginning, just quickly, we're in Utah, I'm assuming, and within Utah, was the Mormonism you grew up in, was it particularly cultish, or was it on the lenient side of Mormonism, or is it all the same? Is it the same cultishness everywhere?
Well, there's a couple things. Let's unpack that a little bit. You said a couple things. First of all, there's a lot of kinds of Mormons, but there's mainly two kinds of Mormons, or subsets. And you're either Orthodox or you're not. It's hard. It's a hard religion to kind of like I think they use the term cafeteria Mormon. It's hard religion to kind of have one foot in and one foot out. It's hard to be semi-active member of the Mormon Church. You can do it, but in a unintentional way, the very active Orthodox members they don't necessarily look down on you, but they do. They're people are assigned to go and visit to help reactivate, so to speak, some of the members of the church who aren't coming as often. So you're already looked at as like a project. So you kind of either have to go or you don't. There's those two kinds, and then there's the other two kinds are there's Utah Mormons, and then there's non-Utah Mormons, and they're all the same. They're under the same church, but the culture in Utah is quite different than it would be for the rest of the world. And so I actually grew up. We didn't talk about this. I grew up in North Carolina actually, and so I was one of those non-Utah Mormons. And so I had a high school of 2,500 people, and I think there was three people in my grade who were Mormon, and 25 or 30, maybe 30 or 40 in the school, and that was in Raleigh, North Carolina. Um, I was a I was a pretty devout Mormon. I was a good Mormon. I did most of the things I was supposed to. I had some rebellious years, but came back, repented, and they let me back in, But so when I grew up in high school, most of my friends, they swore, they drank, whenever they could kind of find alcohol here and there. And most of my friends were having sex with their girlfriends, and that kind of thing. And that was that's a big no-no in most religions, but not a lot of people abide by it. But there are a couple of religions that you do kind of follow, and Mormonism is one of them. People really don't drink. They really don't um, drink coffee, and we'll get into caffeine probably a little bit later. But so I would go to like a party with my friends, and they would offer me booze or something, and I'm like, I don't drink, I'm Mormon, and it was an easy way to not be tempted, so to speak. But in Utah, if you go to a party with friends and people are drinking, they're like, hey, have a drink, and you can't say I don't drink, I'm Mormon, because they're like, so are we, cheers. And so your rebellious Mormons in Utah, you can't hide behind the church as it doesn't set you apart. You don't stand out as much. You're just kind of part of the
Yeah.
pack in Utah. And so there's a lot of very interesting, odd things that I've heard about people that have grown up in Utah as Mormon that are a little bit different. We can touch on some of that as well, and some of it's is quite funny.
Yeah, what you said about drinking and Utah and how you don't stand out. So Utah is very much the home base for the church now, and it's very pervasive. But you said alcohol. There are dry counties in Utah, right? Where alcohol is forbidden completely by the church.
Um,
Or
well, it's not that. So it's the state is governed by the Utah government, which is pretty much made up of a bunch of high influential Mormons, and if they're influential enough, then the leaders of the church may try to influence some of the government. But the church in its by itself doesn't really have any kind of governmental power, if you will. But I'm not really sure about the laws there. I know I don't know if they have dry counties or not. They have for a long time. Utah and Idaho had a agreement with the big bottle beer companies, where instead of having like 5% or 5.5% of alcohol in their beer, they did not allow anything higher than I think 3.2%. Um, and I think they finally I believe they just got rid of that. I don't know. I didn't grow up there, so this is kind of cultural stuff. I may have that wrong a little bit, but it's something like that. But no, I mean it's just state liquor stores everywhere. But boy, if you're courageous enough to be an active Mormon and try to go to the liquor store and not get seen by your neighbors, more power to you.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, speaking of just growing up and in the church, so let's start with the basics a little bit. The things that you were told throughout your youth and then as an adult. Let's start with the basics. Mormonism, Joseph Smith. I'll give everyone my ignorant what I thought he was. I thought he was a suspected or convicted con artist in Massachusetts who then moved around to find I used to say things like gullible, but let's say vulnerable people to take advantage of, like scam artists do. And that was the beginnings of the church. That might be really unfair by me because I don't know anything, but do you think that's accurate?
Well, he had a, reputation of being like a treasure seeker, a treasure hunter, and so he was always trying to find buried treasure, always trying to get other people kind of riled up, around him and get excited about that. I would imagine that he had a very, very magnetic, charming, likable personality. He was very competitive, very outgoing. He drew a lot of attention. People typically liked him. I imagine he had a lot of charisma, but he had this wild hair for, yeah, I mean, he was a treasure seeker. And so, we spoke a little bit earlier, and I looked it up. I didn't see that he was actually convicted. I think he was accused of some stuff here and there, but I don't know if he was ever actually convicted. It's a little ambiguous from what I was able to find, but depends who you ask, I guess. But I'm sure there's some church scholars out there with a know for sure. But the irony with that is, as I'm sure you were going to allude to, is people are we're the Bible, but the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, they have their own book, which is called the Book of Mormon, and it's designed to go hand in hand with the Bible. But where that came from was back in early 1800s. Joseph Smith was led by an angel to this hill where he basically got a shovel and dug a big hole in the ground, and he found a big box, and there were golden plates that had been an ancient record that were written on golden plates, which was common. I mean, people wrote on metal plates, of different kinds back forever ago. But it was a record of the people that lived in the Americas, going way back to like 600 BC. So there are people, we know the people living here in America during that time, but so we didn't know that they were maybe an advanced civilization. Now that is Mormon. That is from the Mormon's perspective, and so it just so happens that your treasure seeker found gold plates later.
Yeah, well,
But
there
yeah,
very well was a civilization there, but it may have had nothing. It may have had nothing to do with Mormons, though,
yeah,
in America before white people. But
yeah.
okay, so great, golden plates, angel. The angel's called Moroni, is that right?
Moroni. Yep.
Look at me, and the Mormon Church through these golden plates in America that Joseph Smith found, it traces that the people who made those were from the Holy Land. So it traces it is the legend. It goes back to Judaism. Is that
Yeah, it starts. In fact, they do lineage in the Book of Mormon too. The lineage it goes all the way back to Jerusalem around 600 BC, which is around the time of Jeremiah. If you know your Bible at all. So yeah, it dates back, and so it just covers it. It tells the account of a family that were righteous in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem in the Bible had a history of being kind of, God got angry and stepped on it a bunch of times. It was destroyed a lot, by the wrath of God and or whatnot. And so this was they were warned to leave Jerusalem because God was going to destroy it again, and they did. And the long story short is they ended up building, building boats, whatever, made their way over to the Americas. They sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and made their way to the Americas, and then after a while, God cursed them and turned their skin black, and then that's how the Mormonism gets a lot of their racist accolades. But and then they claim that the people died off after about 800 years or so, and they were the ancestors of the American Indians. That's the Mormon stance, anyway.
uh-huh? Okay, that
I
makes
left
tons of
out about
sense.
900 years, but
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, this is quick stuff. We encourage anyone to go look stuff up. Like you're not the high priest of the church, and I'm not any kind of genius on this either. But just to give some context of what it is that the beliefs are, people can make up their own mind about this stuff. Needless to say, though, the golden plates are not in a museum somewhere that you can go see. They don't exist.
Now, Danny, they do exist. God took them back. He wanted to make sure all the Mormons had to exercise faith. So he never showed them to anybody except for Nine, like, or well, a handful of people, so a couple different times, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I've
So they
seen the
say.
number 17 somewhere. Could it have been 17 people or something?
So Joseph Smith saw it. Supposedly he was reading them. He was looking down and reading them, and there was like a sheet in front of him, and then he had a scribe named Oliver Cowdery who would just write down what he said. And so Joseph Smith was reading the ancient Egyptian text and translating it into English in real time. But what they, that's how you're taught it. And then we find out later he mostly put his head. He mostly didn't have the plates most of the time during his translation. Most of the time he had his head into a big black hat, like a big Abe Lincoln hat, and he just stuck his face in the hat and just said words, and his scribe wrote stuff down. That's kind of how that happened. And then there was a handful of people that were allowed to see the plates, and they wrote their little testimony about it, that they saw them. But so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and sure, this is for me at least. I mean, I have softened my stance on religion in general. You didn't know me back then, but as a young man, I was quite fervently, quite militantly of the opinion that some of the places I happened to see in the world, the religion was certainly not fucking helping, right? And creating a lot of issues. And I would say that all religions are more or less charlatanry, and there's no reason to ridicule the story of Mormonism any more than some other stories, or the magic underwear, which you can explain to us as well, any more than it is fair to ridicule like Catholic dresses or Jewish leather straps that they wrap around their arms and stuff, whatever. But I have softened my stance to the point where nowadays I find people going to church around me. I find it better that they go seek community there than not
Hmm.
having community at all. So I've kind of become this a little bit softy in the sense that I don't want to any Mormons who, and I know there are Mormons who will find this, right? Because you told me that there is an active community of people looking for content like this where others who have left the church kind of talk about things. So I've softened myself to the point where going to church, I view it as way better than just loneliness and all these other ails of modern society, you know?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean they do, and yeah, religions do community better than non-religion, and Mormonism. I mean, Mormons do community about better than anybody. Did you see the Book of Mormon musical?
Oh yeah, that was gonna be part of my rapid fire round. Dum 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 dum.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say it is the actual. I mean, that's what the musical is about. It's all sacrilegious and lightning strikes from everywhere, right? They try to they get shock value, but at the end of the day, the theme or the message in the musical is that religion is positive because it builds community. It doesn't matter what the beliefs are, as outlandish as they are. It builds community, and it gives people, and it saves nations or whatnot. So I agree with you. If you just could get rid of all the doctrines.
Yeah, and it is weird because yeah, it's community, but there is always an agenda and often a nefarious agenda, and then there's also this thing that they claim is transcendent. So people feel good when they go into a building and sing songs together, and what you really feel good about that godlike transcendent feeling has nothing to do with God, in my opinion. It has to do with the fact that you feel good about being with those people, right? It's the connection that you're so helplessly seeking as as a tiny little human monkey, and that's what feels good. So yeah, whatever. I mean, I guess we're on a tangent, but I think it's nice to see that you kind of agree. Like it wasn't all bad. You grew up in a place where at least you had community. So many people in the modern world grow up without any connection to anything.
Yeah, it's a very I would say toxic relationship you may have with the Mormon Church, even growing up. You don't realize it. Meaning it's as much as you feel good about being in church with your community. You see your friends. Most of your friends are members of the Mormon Church. I mean, you have friends at work and whatnot, but most of your circle of friends are people in your congregation, because the way they do the boundaries, it's geographic. So the people you go to church with are also the people that live in your neighborhood. So again, that's another way that they do that really well. But the part that you don't think about when you're growing up is not only does going to church make you feel good, it also makes you feel less guilty about not going. And I think that's where they have a really that's where they probably unintentionally, why it works so well is you feel the pressure to go because you feel so guilty between you and your relationship with God that He's going to be upset that you didn't go. And so, in a weird way, there's a lot of shame and guilt non-directly
Yeah.
pushed, and that's why people stay so long. People are scared to leave because they're like, what if it is true? What if the odd chance it's not worth leaving? So it's a hard one to escape.
So one of the definitions of a cult, right, is that it is made to feel impossible to leave through this indoctrination, and then if you do leave, they want to separate you from your family. That's another definition. So how, on the scale of cults, where does this fall? When you left, the church didn't try to separate you from your old friends, did they? Or
No, they don't. I think Jehovah's Witness they actually have a shunning ceremony where you turn your head the other way and your family member walks away and you don't ever speak to them again. It's like an actual ceremony. Mormonism doesn't do that, and they would claim that they don't do that. In fact, they would say that when you stop going, that they would send the missionaries out, or they send other members of the congregation to go help check in on you, and try to bring you back, kind of thing. Which they do, unless you have a really good reason to leave, like we did. And then when we left, like nobody, it was weird. Nobody tried. Nobody really talked to us. They just kind of like let us go, because I think they realized that we may have been a problem had we stayed. But there's not really shunning. It's more of it's like a unconscious shun. I mean, it's people shun you only because they don't see you anymore, and they don't think to invite you to the things they used to. They're not going to invite you to the church activity because that's where so much stuff is there. It's kind of a mutual. And to be honest, I don't really want. I mean, I had some great friends, lifelong friends that I just almost stopped talking to overnight, and not because of anybody really chose it. It was just you realize that's such it's a key part of your identity, that when you lose that, you lose a piece of that friendship. But the great thing is when they leave later on, if they do, you get those friends back. So I've had that happen so many times. So
okay, so in this community of Mormons, so in I don't know, in Scientology, all the movies they're allowed to watch are the ones with like Tom Cruise in it or whoever, another Scientologist and all that. But are you guys very like proudly Mormon? So some famous Mormons, I don't know, in basketball, is everyone wearing a Jimmer Fredette jersey and and like although he plays in China or somewhere now, unless he's retired. And
yeah, I think he just retired.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Or
um,
and is everyone voting for Mitt Romney, by the way? Is that like that's the rule? You're a conservative and you will vote Romney or
I mean, until 8 years ago, yes, but yeah, yeah. No, Mitt Romney was he was the king of the Mormons as far as the political office. But I mean, Mormons have always been in politics. Joseph Smith even ran for president, actually, at the end of his before he died. But I mean, I think he was doing it for different reasons. He was doing it because they felt like they were being persecuted and pushed out, so he was trying to be more involved. But I mean, people again, it depends who you talk to. But in my opinion, I mean, they were pushed out west to settle Utah because of polygamy, not because of their beliefs. I mean, they always say they're a peculiar people, and they are. I mean, Mormons are pretty weird. But if you meet somebody, I mean, if you would have talked to me 30 years ago when I was in the thick of it, I mean, you would have known a difference. We would have been just like this. I wouldn't have talked any different. It would have been very, very casual. I mean, there's a health code, that kind of makes them stand out a little bit. And then there's some oddities where, like the caffeine thing is a little bit odd, but even caffeine in itself isn't a doctrine. It was there was one senior leader of the church back in the 60s or so, named his name was Bruce Arbor Conkey, and He wrote a book called Mormon Doctrine where he put his own opinion. Now, he was a leader, high level leader of the church, but he still had his own opinions about like some interpretation of some of the doctrines. And one of the things that he wrote in his book, which is not an official Mormon book, was to avoid caffeine and to avoid face cards and like some weird stuff like that. And so there's some lore from that that still kind of hangs around, but there's nothing scripturally about caffeine. But yeah, I mean it's but you talk about sports fans and it's yeah, I mean they definitely love their BYU. So anybody coming into BYU or graduating from there, they're fans forever. And I think BYU is going to be ranked in the top 5 this year in basketball. They've got a bunch of people, a bunch of non-Mormons coming in, but um, there's an honor code that those guys are going to be. They're going to be a rude awakening. You can't have sex, you can't drink, you can't do any of that
At the university campus.
at all. Even if you're a non-Mormon, you can't drink while you're going to school there. Even if you're
Wow.
off campus, yeah, you can't have sex with your girlfriend. You can't, any of that, or you literally get kicked out of school.
Maybe some athletes will be like, this is perfect. I'm gonna be a sexually frustrated,
Right?
healthy monster, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But so good point. BYU, when we're talking about the community that now in Mormonism, expectation for everyone after high school that BYU is where you go and that's that? Or,
It's probably a matter of convenience because the expectation is that you can serve you serve a 2-year mission, a Mormon mission, where you go and you preach the Mormon gospel somewhere in the world. And, I'm sure your listeners know the Mormon missionaries. And then when you come back, yeah, you're supposed to start getting married and start popping out kids. Get your education in there along the way. So for me, North Carolina, I came back. There's 3 people in my grade, that were Mormon, and I dated one of them for 2 months, and I didn't like the other one. What do? If I want to get married, you move to Utah and go find a wife,
yeah.
and then you go to one of the schools
Cool.
there. So, yeah,
Yeah. All right. So BYU is named after Brigham Young. Let's look a little bit more into Joseph Smith and let's move on to this character because I know nothing about Brigham Young. I know so Joseph Smith, presidential candidate, he got killed, right? So technically the first ever assassinated presidential candidate.
yeah. I don't know if he was running when he. I don't know how that timeline adds up or not. If he I don't know if
Yeah.
he was a candidate when he got killed, but
Okay. Before he got killed though, I think it's fair that we properly assassinate his character because everything that's out there, the more you learn about him, the less you like him. So the wives, some of them are kids, right?
yeah. And the Brigham Young wives are easy. There's a lot. That's a lot easier to find, more definitive. Um, Joseph Smith's wives. His wife was his main wife was Emma Smith. And as the story goes, I mean, there's always 2 stories that we can always tell. We can tell the one that I learned in Sunday school growing up, and then we can tell the one that I had to learn painstakingly, out all hours of the night on the internet, trying to find out why I've given up 40 years of my life to this religion. Um, but so you start to realize, you start to see things like he got caught like in a bar and having sex with a woman, and a couple things like that. Then he introduced polygamy into the church, right?
After getting caught cheating.
Yeah. Oh,
What a move. What a
it,
move.
it's even one better, man. It's in fact the way he said he was walking down a road and an angel appeared to him because he was told he needed to practice polygamy and he didn't want to do it because he felt it was wrong or did whatever. And he was walking down a road and an angel appeared to him and threatened him with like death or whatever if he didn't practice polygamy. And so literally he was forced to continue to cheat. I mean, forced to continue to have multiple women in his life. So that was his story, pretty much after he got caught cheating. But Mormons will tell you now that he never consummated any of those marriages. We don't have any definitive lineage from any of his other wives from him. So the only line we know from Joseph Smith is from Emma, his first wife, and so it's a little bit ambiguous. But all the scholars and historians, he had a handful of wives for sure. Yes, and a couple of them. Well, I'll call them minors to be. That's about as polite as I can. But I mean, these are kids.
Yeah. With both of them, are they? So are they both Smith and Brigham Young? Did they both have multiple wives, some of whom were kids?
Most of Brigham's were more age appropriate, at least above, you know,
Okay,
in
so
the
it's
20s.
mainly Smith who.
Yeah, I mean, they might have been a lot younger. They might have been 20, 30 years younger. Somebody out there's listening, they know the answer to this. I'm sure he had a couple teenage wives, but he wasn't known for that as much as like Joseph Smith. I mean, Joseph Smith was promising like salvation to members of the church to marry their 14-year-old daughters,
Yeah,
exchanging.
tell me
So,
about what's her name? Helen Mar Kimball. Tell me about
yes,
her.
Helen Kimball. So, I'll just give you just the real basics on it. Is their parents, were members of the church, and they obviously knew Joseph Smith and whatnot, and he came to them. He told them about polygamy, and he wanted to marry their daughter, who was just turned 14, and they, of course, like any good parents would, they said no, and that was kind of the end of it. But Joseph, he kind of pressed with it, and at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know all the nitty gritty details, but he told them that the Lord had commanded it, and that they would be exalted into the highest kingdom of heaven if they allowed him to marry Helen Mar Kimball, which he did. And there's some diaries. She has some diaries that have survived. She was writing a diary before that and after that, and some of those writings have survived. You can go out there and read them. But yeah, she wasn't happy about it. The parents weren't happy about it, but they kind of came around. But I think probably because it was probably optics, and this is my opinion. Reading through the lines, you can't say no to the prophet, but you can't give up your 14-year-old daughter to a man either. But if you really believe that this
Yeah.
this this man is who he says he is, well then you kind of go with some faith. So I imagine they were conflicted at some level, but God, I would hope so at least. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, he married her. Then I think a 15-year-old, maybe a 16 or 17-year-old, or I think three, maybe under 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not exactly the first thing they tell you when they knock on your door, the missionary.
Nope, they don't. They don't. They skip that one. It's too bad. It's a pretty compelling story.
Yeah. So now to get back to the now we've I think that sufficiently assassinates the already once violently killed Joseph Smith.
Well,
Shame for
let
him.
me let me tell you why he got assassinated. This is the ultimate assassination of his character. So they kept getting. I mean, they start in New York, got put. They get pushed out, pushed further and further away. They're in Ohio for a while, then Missouri, and eventually ended up in Utah. And along that path is when they implemented polygamy, and it was only for at the time it was only for like the top 5 or 10% of the Mormon men. It wasn't like just blanket everybody. It was only some of the leaders. And but then they had a habit of sending some of these married men. They would have couples, and they wanted to preach the gospel and spread it around the world. And so they would send these men like overseas, and they would go to England and all over Europe, and they would teach people, and they would hand out books of Mormon. Meanwhile, while they were gone, these church leaders, some of them were marrying their wives, and so not only did they get second wives, they got some wives that already had husbands. And so this polygamy thing was not even done. Um, we talked today about being, people are ethical non-monogamous, right? And they do polyamory and stuff, and they try to do it with being mindful and respect. And this was anything but that. It was like a free for all, men stealing other men's wives, and sending them off to war, basically. But so they were getting run out of so many places they were living, and there was a man that was going to expose. He was writing an article and exposing Joseph Smith about the polygamy. He had details and whatnot about what he'd done with polygamy, and it was going to print the next morning. And Joseph and a band of his brothers or whatever went and they snuck out in the middle of the night, and they went to the printing press where the article was going to be written and was going to be published to the whole city, and they blew it up. They burnt it down. But as a Mormon, we were told that he went and did that because they were going to be publishing some anti-Mormon lies or whatever, that was going to go out there. And so they were vindicated in God's name. They were went to destroy the printing press to make sure that the lies didn't get spread. But the lie that they were talking about was the truth, which was actually polygamy. And so that is why. Then they went out and then he was getting arrested for that. So that's why he was in jail. And then a mob came and killed him because of the polygamy mostly. Now he wasn't a martyr, even though they say he was a martyr. But yeah, so he died because he was trying to cover his tracks and hide his secret. So
Yeah. Well, now we'll keep the timeline in mind because I want to know how we then get to Brigham Young and who that was. But around you, wherever you were in Mormon communities, how common is polygamy now, today?
It's not practiced today. I mean, they officially ended it in like 1897, but there were some threats against the church, like tax status. I mean, there's some they had reason to end it, financial ones, I believe. But you had a lot of men in the late like 1897 who, I mean, sure there were probably some men who were just married to their fourth or fifth wife in 1890, right, in 1900, and up into the 50s and like maybe late 50s, you still had some Mormon men that had multiple wives just because they were still alive, you know. And the only other way that they still practice it is you can do in the Mormon temples. We'll get to that later too, but they do marriages in the Mormon temple, which is and this is one of the things that my parents really were attracted to with Mormon churches. It's not till death do you part, right? And it's you're married for what they call time and all eternity. So you're with your spouse forever into heaven as like a family unit with your kids and everything. So you keep that family unit in the afterlife, and that was really attractive, that doctrine. But the only way that's still practiced now is when you die. If I'm married and my wife were to die, I can and I get married for time and eternity, I can get married again for time and eternity again. So I'm married to two wives in the afterlife. Now, women, if their husband dies, they can't get married for time and eternity again. They only get one. So from that sense, it's still kind of practiced, but not not like walking around where we have three homes on the same block.
And some of the more, how do I say it, sensationalist stories you hear about Mormons do talk about these more hardcore sects or families that branch off and buy land somewhere and then set up a more old school way of running things, and there they at least have multiple sexual partners, if not wives, right? So that does happen, right? But then that's like any cult. They're.
Yeah, so the spinoff certainly happened. I mean, Warren Jeffs, who's in jail now, I mean, in Colorado City in southern Utah, that was a spinoff from the church, and there was some question. I think this is the right segue for this. There's after Joseph Smith died, there was question of who the next prophet was going to be, and Emma, his wife Emma Smith, and a lot of other people thought it should be his son, like it should be a direct lineage should be passed on, and then there's another group who didn't think that. And anyway, Brigham Young is a powerful, smart, motivated, charismatic, unbelievably talented asshole. And
So he was the direct follower after Smith dies in 1844 violently. Brigham Young is the direct follower after that, right?
Yeah, he was the next. He was the next. I'm not sure how much time passed, but there some amount of time passed, and they were trying to figure out what direction the church was going to go. And you had a couple. There was a church that was called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that still exists today, but they have much smaller following. They're actually pretty decent. They're decently liberal. They have female clergy now, and they're a little bit more open to LGBTQI folks. But like Warren Jeffs in southern Utah, that is the cult of cults, where he series of men, they're still marrying teenagers, young, and I know people that are directly involved in trying to get like save people. They go down there and get them out. And there's some Netflix episodes and stuff on that. Actually, some of our friends that are doing that. But yeah, so that went. some going this way, some going this way. Brigham Young went this way. There was a guy named James Strang, and this is interesting for later. There's James Strang who didn't like the polygamy part of the church, and so he actually took, I think, like 2 or 3 thousand people, and he went up north, up into Michigan, when everybody else went out west. But, um, but yeah, it went a lot of different directions. But Brigham Young was he was charismatic. He was an influence.
So
He's a leader.
Brigham Young, then under his leadership, that becomes sort of then mainstream Mormonism. That ends up abandoning polygamy and settling in Utah and all that. That's under him, right?
Yeah, but no, polygamy got bigger under him. It didn't end until much later, because I'm going to get it wrong, but it doesn't really matter. He had somewhere between 20 and 45 wives. I don't know. It's a lot. I mean, to the point where I would imagine some of them are just out of convenience. He actually probably never really saw some of them. I mean, that's how many kids. Yeah, I can't imagine. And he's running the church too. So, but yeah, there was a little bit of a wild, wild west out there when they settled Utah. There's some bad history. There's been some shows recently about interacting with the Native Americans there, and some bad wars and killings and stuff. But they were figuring it out. And Brigham Young was pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
Okay. And right. Speaking of interactions with the native population out there in the West, right now there are also Mormons in Mexico, right? And there have been like violent wars with the cartels. What's going on? How did they end up there?
So there's Mormons all over the world, and the reason is because their missionary service program is so it's ingrained in you when you're little, that you almost feel. I mean, you always have a choice not to go on a Mormon mission when you turn of age, but there's a pressure and guilt that you go. And so, I mean, most people, at least when I grew up, most people went. If you didn't go, you were like, people like talked about you behind your back. And so you say, yes, I want to go. And then you fill out your application, and you send it into Salt Lake, to the church headquarters. And then within a couple of weeks or a month, you get a letter back in the mail, and you open the letter, and usually people gather around with their families, and they read the letter, and it says your name, and it says where you'll be spending the next 2 years of your life. So you don't get to choose. You have no say in it. You literally get a letter, open it up, and that's where you're going. And it could be Guatemala, and it could be Paris, and it could be anywhere. If there are people on the earth, if there are people there, there are more missionaries there, all over the world. Unless the governments don't allow, especially 80s, 90s, we some communist governments that didn't allow them in. But so yeah, they've spread everywhere, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to get into the details of interactions with Native Americans, for example, because that's for some historian of that stuff. What about today? So, is there a lot of racism or anti-Semitism or things like that in the church? Because it's a pretty white church, I'd say, Mormons. I haven't ever met one that isn't,
Um,
right?
yeah, it's becoming it's I think the Latin America is becoming more prevalent now, but it's run by a bunch of white men for sure. And I mean, and most of that goes back to, I glazed over this at the very beginning, but it goes back to some of the content in the Book of Mormon is not it's not super positive for people that aren't white. So I mean, there were phrases in there about the Lord, like we call them like the white and delightsome people, and those were the good guys in the Book of Mormon. The bad guys were the dark skinned ones, and they were dark skinned because they rebelled against God, and God cursed them. He literally changed the color of their skin to darker complexion as a punishment or a curse for being wicked. And so the whole premise of the Book of Mormon is based on that dark people are evil and wicked, and white people are pure and righteous. And so you're already hard when you give somebody a book. It's hard to say we're not racist, but here, read this really super racist book.
Okay. That, again, not something you hear very often. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we go a little bit more into your life, I think that's kind of gives us an idea of the early history of the church and the doctrines a little bit. But about doctrines, some things that people outside the church may have heard of, but we don't know what they mean. So set us straight on, on some stuff. You already gave us the temple names, the secret name that is something you're not meant to tell. What about magic underwear? What is that, and does it exist?
Um, yeah, it works. They call them they're temple garments. What they're called, they call them garments, and you wear them day and night, 24/7. They're crazy, super orthodox people, which I think most people have aged out. I mean, they wear them to sleep. They'll have sex in them. I mean, they barely will take them off except for anything except just a shower. And those are really kind of fanatical, far reaching Mormons. But for the most part, I mean, you wear them just like you would wear your boxers or anything else. The only thing, I mean, they're really kind of boring. I mean, it's like one looks like a white T-shirt, like an undershirt, and the other one are like if you think of like white, like spandex biker pants, but made out of cotton. So they're kind of a little bit longer in the legs, and then they're supposed to help you be modest, so you don't show off too much skin. And then there's also there's four distinct small symbols sewn into them. So when you put them on, you're supposed to remind yourself every day. When you put them on, you're supposed to remind yourself to follow Christ. Bend the knee to Christ. It's a reminder of your commitments. And your promises you made as a Mormon when you were baptized. It's pretty harmless. They're definitely much. You mentioned this at the beginning. They're much less exciting than what we saw last week at in Vatican City when they're getting a new pope.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, that's
Yeah.
elaborate. Their costumes are beautiful, and they're rich in tradition.
Yeah.
The underwear is not easy. It's the people that are easy to make fun of. If you can talk about their underwear, that's even more fun.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of people and fun, who's living on the dark side of the moon? I don't want to call it that, by the way. That's a classic Pink Floyd album. Let's call it the hidden side of the moon. Who's living there?
Well, let's say Pink Floyd stole it from Brigham Young, because Brigham Young used to teach. He used to teach that people lived on the moon, and had been there. I think long before we were here or whatever, or they were there before. And uh, and that doctrine, or that teaching, never really. There wasn't a lot of elaboration on it, but he talked about it over the course of like over multiple decades. It was something he believed in, and it never really went anywhere. Nobody talks about it because it's so outlandish. But he had people with his influence and whatnot. He had people convinced there were people living on the moon, and all kinds of stuff like that. He had other stuff that goes against the Joseph Smith Mormonism. He taught for a while that he taught something called the blood atonement, which meant that even Christ's death on the cross wasn't enough to save you from your sins. Which every other Christian religion, that's why he suffered for the sins in the garden, and then he died on the cross. So because we're imperfect people, right? So we could be saved through His grace. That's the whole reason He came here. Except Brigham Young taught that there was a blood atonement, which means it would require a human sacrifice at times to be able to make it into heaven. And he taught this like in the temples, and nobody else, no other prophet before him or after him has taught that. But he was a prophet for like 40 years, and so he taught that there'd be some killing in order. Christ's death wasn't enough. You got to kill some people to get there now. Yeah, he had all kinds of weird theories. He thought Adam and Eve. He thought Adam was God who'd come down in the flesh.
Yeah. What about Bigfoot?
Oh, Bigfoot. Have you ever seen Bigfoot? Have you ever seen a Bigfoot sighting?
Me,
You, yeah.
I see Bigfoot in the mirror every day.
All right. I'm going to educate you. You and anybody else that's seen Bigfoot did not see Bigfoot. They saw Cain, from Cain and Abel. Danny's trying to laugh. This is people's lives. These are people's lives, and I'm just going to pretend it wasn't mine. This is kind of it's kind of church lore, but it's based in some comments that some of the leaders of the church made back in the day. There was a man that joined the church. His name was Parley Pratt, and he was out doing missionary work, trying to baptize people. And he said he came upon a man who was about 8 feet tall and really hairy and just didn't really say much or whatever. And he spoke to him, and the man said his name was Cain. And as the story goes, that Cain was, after he killed his brother, as punishment, God basically sentenced him to a life of loneliness on the earth until the end of time. And so he's supposed to have been wandering around the whole world forever, can't die, can't talk to anybody, can't have friends or have relationships. And so the natural, I guess, deduction from that is, if you have a man who's 8 feet tall, really hairy, really secluded, has been around for generations, more than any of us have been around. Like, who else is like that in this world? It's Bigfoot and the legend of Bigfoot. And Bigfoot has different names all around the world, and so which it just feeds into that story. And the fact that this Parley Pratt said that he met him and he introduced himself to him as Cain, and he looked like Bigfoot. So yeah, Bigfoot is a Mormon. So just so you know,
Fucking A. That's, to
an
me, I mean,
excommunicated Mormon, I should say. He was kicked out.
honestly, if you run into Bigfoot in the woods, then I think it might be a relief if he wants to talk to you about Christ for a moment,
Dan, I would
right?
not.
Or,
Nothing would
yeah,
thrill me more to actually seeing Bigfoot and having him come up to me and having him actually tell me that he was Cain. I mean, I hope they're right on that one.
yeah,
That'd be amazing if Bigfoot was Cain.
yeah. We're bordering on the insane here, though. Jesus.
Yeah.
So, uh, okay, a couple more. What what are whale eggs?
Okay, this is a gem. So when you leave, most people, when you leave Mormonism, something happened that they say, like, something broke your shelf, right? Where you something in your mind switched, where you're finally able to look at something objectively when you weren't able to the previous 40 years for whatever reason. So for me, where I know we're going to get to this, was my son coming out. It was like a switch, and it was like, oh, they have this wrong. What else might they have wrong? And that happens to people over a number of issues. And so when this happens, now you're suddenly a sponge and you're an open book, and you want to learn everything, and see what you have to unlearn. And so now you're just like trying to read everything you can about other religions and history about your own religion, and see what really happened. And so after you get through all the really damning stuff, right? Because really you're making sure, because you're leaving the church, you want to make sure that you're right before you leave, because you don't want to, if you're wrong, now you're worse than somebody who never joined. You're somebody that joined and then left. You like forsake God, right? And so people, when they leave, they're super careful and they dig deep. And one of these deep dives or whatever, a couple years into this, I came across this thing where as we said, Brigham Young was a genius, right, or whatever, a entrepreneur, and he wanted to increase tourism in Utah after they settled it, to build up the economy there. And so he sent a guy down to San Diego to go get some whale eggs, because he said, we'll bring back some eggs, and we'll put the whales in the Salt Lake, and we'll have whales here that people can see, and and they can interact with it.
Wait,
And people.
at no point did anyone tell this guy that whales are mammals and they actually
So I haven't been
don't
able
lay
to
eggs.
determine if they would have been able to know that or not. I'm not sure what kind of education a lot of these people had, because they grew up on the road traveling out west. But that is a big. I'm making a big apology for them right here. But yeah, so so he goes down there and he goes to get some eggs, and then he's asking around to the whale egg people, and that's what they said. They said whales are whales are mammals. They don't lay eggs. And so, this guy's like, hey, Brigham, whales are mammals. They don't lay eggs. And of course, Brigham, being a prophet, he should have known that, even if he wasn't brought up on that. So what he did instead is, which is even crazier, they gave up on the whale egg idea because they don't exist, and then they actually bought a baby male and a baby female whale, and they put them in a train cart full of water, like a mobile aquarium, and took them from San Diego to Salt Lake. And they survived the trip. And when they got there, they dumped them into the Salt Lake, and then nobody ever saw them again because nothing can live in that except these microscopic shrimp. So the whales all died. There were no eggs, and they killed the whales. So
Mm.
it has nothing to do with any doctrinal anything, but it just kind of shows how crazy some of the stuff was that was going on out there at the time. People they're just winging it. Yeah.
I can't help but think that me, like, I could have definitely started some kind of movement back then, right?
You're doing it right now.
Yeah, that's true, but I would have been so much more benevolent, right? I would have been like, I don't need you to give me your daughters and like pay me everything. I just want 8% of your salary, like council tax, you know?
Yeah.
Like property tax or something. And I could have lived a nice happy life and people would have kind of liked me as a messiah, I think. You know?
You're too nice of a guy to for people to follow. That's a problem. They like narcissists. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you got to be a sociopath to
yeah.
come up with this stuff. So, okay, wild stuff. We'll do one more because I mean the Mormon temple thing. So first of all, you know so much about Mormonism. Some of the stuff that you told me privately, like you will be welcome back, and we can go into details about all kinds of stuff. But the Mormon temple, when you're growing up in this, you don't know what goes in there, right? Only after you left are there people on the internet doing hidden cameras from these places, and you don't know anything about what happens in the temple. The people actually running the church are
So
keeping it all secret, right?
so what happens in the temple? Not just anybody can go into the temple. Obviously, before it's dedicated, after they build it, they'll usually do an open house that they'll let the general public walk through so you can see what it looks like, and they are beautiful. Not my style, but they are beautiful. I mean, just gaudy chandeliers. I mean, just gorgeous architectural and craftsmanship. But and so they're really pretty to walk through, and a lot of the rooms in there they're supposed to like emulate like heaven, right? And so you're trying to create something that you don't feel like you're on this earth, and they do a good job at that. But like I said, not once it's dedicated, then no non-member of the church can go in for any reason ever. Even like the janitors cleaning HVAC people, if they have to do work on it, they're always like Mormons that come that have the skill labor to do it, and they'll go service it. But not all Mormons can go in there either. You have to get it's like a little card. It's called a temple recommend, which means that you have to go see your bishop, which is like a pastor of your local congregation, and he interviews you and he asks you pre written out temple recommend questions that are written from the top from the church, and there's about 15 of them, and they ask you like, do you believe in God and Jesus Christ, and do you pay your tithing, and some very general questions like that. But then they ask other questions about like, do you obey the law of chastity, and you're like, well, what is the law of chastity? And he'll explain that, well, that's you don't want to have sexual relations out of your marriage, right? Which also includes masturbation. There's no masturbation, so you can't touch yourself. All of those things make you unworthy to go into the temple, and you won't get your little temple recommend. So if you drink alcohol, you drink coffee, you might smoke a cigarette twice a year, you won't be going to the temple. So the temple is for the elite of the elite.
Okay, sorry, two things. Number one, don't touch yourself is also a doctrine of this show. Number two, the temple recommend is an actual physical like boarding pass that they scan to get into the building.
Yeah, and it's a little piece of paper that's just in a little cheap plastic casing. It's not even done well, but there's a lot of honor system there too, right? I mean, you could probably, I think they barcode it now, but I mean, you could probably go on there and replicate one, but it was harder to do that, 20 years ago without the technology we have now. But yeah, you need that little pass to go in, and yeah, and then you go in. So you go in to you're doing one of two things. You're going in there and worshiping, or doing an ordinance for yourself, like a required ordinance for you to get into heaven, or you're going in there to do one of those for somebody who has died. And Mormons are well known for doing baptisms for the dead. They don't dig people up and baptize corpses, but they stand in as proxy, and it's actually pretty cool the way they do it. If you have if your grandparent died or whatever, and you can go in there, and you can do something to help save them if you believe in that. it's a nice feeling. You talk about community, you get that dopamine hit, that rush because you've done a good deed. But there's some stuff that's really weird and it's really culty and it's very. I think this is where Mormons get the tag of being a cult is because of what goes on in the temple. There's chanting and there's very very. I mean, you think Mormon underwear is weird. There's very odd dress that you wear, and everybody's in uniform and you're saying things simultaneous and you're like walking in rows and it's very traditional, um, culty. And Joseph Smith was a Mason, and so if anybody is familiar with the Masonic temple, they're secretive too. A lot of the stuff in the Mormon temples come right out of the Mason Lodge textbook.
Okay.
Yeah, but there are some levels in there that I've never been to, and people don't go to unless you're really super white and delightsome.
Yeah, well, there is cultiness. Number one reminds me a bit of what people say about Scientology, where there are these levels of secrecy, where ceremonies are these
Hmm.
legends that you have to strive your whole life and probably pay a lot of money. Not like Scientology, there aren't actual fees in Mormonism, but you are paying some kind of church tax, I'm assuming, and
You
you're
did ten
donating
percent
to
a ten
church
percent
charity.
tithe. Yeah,
Yeah.
10%. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you're paying a lot of money, and years later, maybe if you haven't pissed off the wrong people, you might get to do a little rain dance inside in a weird robe. Is that it? So that's very cultish, right? Where you're selling bullshit that isn't worth
Hmm.
any money, and you have to pay years to get to that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and they would tell you that the tithe brings you blessings, right? Give sacrificing will bring benefit, or whatever. So that's kind of what you're told there. But yeah, you got to build up the kingdom, right? And the church was about to go under bankrupt, early 1900s, and there was one of the prophets, Wilford Woodruff. He instituted tithing, and so he 10% of everything. And it used to be like chickens and barley and stuff, and now it's just money. So, but yeah, but 10% all the time.
Mm.
That's a lot of money over your whole
So
life. But yeah.
to me about the rumors that related to temple practices that there was someone who claimed to have gone undercover to the temple and filmed Mitt Romney doing these chants and dances.
So yeah, I will say his name because I know he would love it if I said his name. So he goes by a Facebook name, new name Noah, and as you might, for your intelligent listeners out there, have already figured out, this is his temple name, his super secret temple name, and he makes it as his Facebook name because his name was Noah, and they call it the new name. And his real name is Mike Norton, and he is a fearless former Mormon, and is motivated to. He's not trying to tear it down. He's just trying to expose what's true, what's out there. And with respect towards the religion or the people, he's not bad mouthing it. He's not putting out lies about it. But see, he's like, yeah, everybody should knows what goes on in there. And so I don't know how he does it. He doesn't really talk about it, but he gets these temple recommends, that people have from answering the questions. They're good for a year, and so someone might have a temple recommend, and then they decide to leave Mormonism, right? Their shelf breaks, and they're like, "This isn't true anymore." But their temple card is still good for like another 7 months, and so without having to go in and renew it. So a lot of times he'll get people to give him their temple cards, right? And so he will go in under different names and just dress up because he knows the park because he's done it before, and he'll have spy glasses on and stuff, and he'll go into the temple and he'll film the whole thing. It's like a 2.5 hour session, and he films it with his glasses or his button lenses. And in the United States, when Mitt Romney was running for president against Barack Obama in his first term, there was rumor about there was going to be a October or October surprise, right? Something that would destroy Romney. He would never be able to. He would never be president after that. Couldn't recover. And so my what I thought it was based on my conversation with Mike after, since he's really vague about it for a reason. So he was going to release. He had video of Mitt Romney doing chants and like waving his arms and doing all the things like in unison with everybody else. The stuff that looks really culty, especially out of context. I mean, it's really culty in context, but out of context, I mean, it's really really bad. And so what that going around YouTube for a hot minute, and Romney would have been, I mean, the Republicans would have turned on him. And so, but it didn't happen, and I am convinced. And Mike will not talk about it, and I'm convinced now that this is just my opinion or my guess is that I think he was probably threatened. I think the Mormon Church probably threatened him with something enough to make him not do it. Because I know a couple of stories where, I mean, they push some stuff under the rug, some sexual misconduct. I've seen it multiple times, almost firsthand. It's really sad.
Speaking of which, any scandals like with the Catholic Church coming from the Mormon temples?
Probably not from the, well, yeah, actually, yeah, there was, yeah, 6, 7 years ago, there was a guy named Joseph Bishop who was, so when Mormon missionaries, they go out to the world, they go to Salt Lake or Provo in Utah for 2 months, and they get a crash course training on how to be a missionary. You're there for a month to learn, but if you're going and learning another language, you're there for 2 months. And so you learn a language and you learn how to teach your religion in that language. And it's pretty impeccable how quickly, but how good a job. And I did it, and I learned French there, and so I went through the whole process. But so back, I don't know, 70s, maybe 80s, 70s, 80s, there was at this, they call it the Mission Training Center, MTC. Whoever the guy is in charge of it, the president of the Mission Training Center, there was a guy named Joseph Bishop, and it came to light about 6 years ago that like 30 years ago, he took like the female missionaries, they call them sister missionaries, the female missionaries like downstairs into like some basement thing, and he would have his way with them or molest them or try to get them to do stuff to them or with them sexually. Yeah. And it was buried for like 30 years, and it hit the fan about 5, 6 years ago. And
yeah, so similarly to other church scandals, it's when it's buried and when it's known is that it becomes official church policy to hide it. That's where because abusers exist in all human communities, so that's not unique. But yeah, it's the hiding has been.
Yeah, people that protect the abusers, that's 10 times worse.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, not shocking to me. That was expected. But just for my comment on that Mitt Romney thing is, I know we've not covered even 1% of the doctrine of the church, but just the things that were covered here about the history of the church and some of the people involved and some of the beliefs that they may have held. This is a worrying thing if someone's intensely into this, for them to be the leader of the free world. Like I at the time when the election was going on, I didn't know that Mitt Romney, like being a Mormon, I didn't have an idea of what that meant. It was like, okay, he's a type of Christian. Good for him, like all Republicans are. But yeah, this is I'm pretty happy it was Obama in the end, in that sense, you know.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different take on that. Right around that time is about right when I left Mormonism. So I went into that election being a Mormon, and I actually really liked Mitt Romney as a candidate. I wish he hadn't been Mormon. Actually, I think he might have. Well, he would have been Obama, first black president, you know. But I wish he hadn't been Mormon, because I thought he was. He's a man that compromised his own personal beliefs, like his own moral beliefs, and chose the way of the people in Massachusetts. He signed off on some abortion stuff, and that he was against his personal belief. And for me, and as we know, he was the guy that basically authored what we now call Obamacare, right? The healthcare system in this country, which is typically thought to be a left-leaning principle, whatever. And so he kind of like wrote that. So he was already leaning left, even though it went against his core beliefs. And people didn't like him for that. I respected him for that, because he's willing to compromise his own belief to listen to his constituents. And I thought he made a good president for that reason. But I did understand the fear that people had. Said, what if your prophet tells you to go do something, then you're going to go do it? But it's not really like that in the church. I mean, people aren't sheep like they are in some other probably culty religions. they encourage self-reliance. They really encourage you to be on your own and to think for yourself and think for yourself, but under this umbrella of doctrine.
Play your own game, but within the stadium that I built, you know?
Right,
You can have
exactly.
your own ball, yeah.
And you know what? And as long as you live in that box and you don't need to go outside of that box, I mean, Mormonism isn't. It's not a bad place. It's not a bad place to be. I mean, you hit it. You hit it right at the beginning when you talk about community. The community is great. You have, I mean, gosh, I had at any given time, I had 30 or 35 like men close to my age. I could call and say, hey, let's go out and let's go to this game or let's go do something. Just at your fingertips. And I don't have that now. I don't know where you get it, but so it's great. But when something happens and you suddenly are forced to look outside that box and it doesn't fit with your narrative, boy, it really does. It changes fast, and that's what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the segue. So, now, how old are you? And I'm assuming you're married to only one wife, as we established nowadays. And
That anybody knew
you
about.
have
Yeah.
a kid. Yeah, you have a kid. You're still fully Mormon. Is he going to Mormon schools and all of that?
Um, yeah. So, so I'm 51. I'm 51 right now, and so this was in 2013. I was 39, 39, 38, 39, and my son was 13. And all growing up, when he was 2 or 3, he used to talk about wearing girls' clothes sometimes, and so we thought maybe there's a little maybe a little gender dysmorphia or something, and then we just asked our pediatrician about it. He goes, yeah, some kids do it and some kids grow out of it. And this would have been in like 2001, when this happened, and way before people were talking about as much as they were recently about gay rights and the movement, and especially trans issues. So we just kind of like let it go, and then also off and on over the next 10 to 12 years, as he got older, he didn't like sports. He had some mannerisms that you normally would kind of associate with the gay community. All like some of the stereotypes, right, that we unintentionally or intentionally put out there, as we do as a society. So he was really musical, when he grew up, but there are plenty of straight people musical, so that's nothing by itself. And he wasn't like overly flamboyant, but a little bit, and just enough. And I mean, mostly the way he played basketball we tried him in everything. He played every sport. We tried all the instruments and wait to see what stuck. But yeah, the way he played basketball, I was like, oh wow, he looks really gay out there. When he was like 7 or 8. But so he gets older, and then around 11 or 12, there's a girl in our congregation. They call them wards. The congregation, they call them in our ward. So our ward, there's a girl at his age, and they were really really good friends. They hung out all the time, and we'd have their family over for dinner, and they would be hanging out downstairs or talking constantly, always just talking. And then one day he said, he's like, I don't know who I'll get married to, but I hope it's somebody just like, and said her name. So he's talking about marrying this girl who's also 12. And so yeah, you're seeing some things, but you're also thinking, well, okay, he's coming into puberty, he's noticing girls. I'm like, okay, well, maybe not. Maybe he's a little more on the scale, right? And so, which I didn't know about then, but so sister-in-law, so my wife's younger sister, who's like 21 or 20 years old, is dating this guy named Andy. And Andy, freaking love Andy, one of my most favorite people on this planet. So she's dating this guy named Andy, and she tells us about him. If they're going to get married, they're going to do the whole thing, right? So we friend this guy on Facebook. We haven't met him, and I pulled him up on Facebook, and I'm like, that guy is so gay. Just one photo, and I'm like, she doesn't how she has to know. They've been dating for a long time, and they're talking about getting married. And I'm telling my wife, we're like, he's gay. It was just plain that we just knew it. And so anyway, long story short is yes, he's gay, and yes, he came out to her. He said he loved her so much that he had to be honest with her. And the only person that he's ever been honest with about it, with his sexuality, even himself. So he didn't love himself enough to be honest with himself And so she's devastated because their wedding is off, but she's also, this is her best friend, and now he's going to be going through something very difficult inside the Mormon Church. So we're watching all that happen, and all that kind of happens, and then it ends, and they're really good friends, and that's the end of it. Except now we're all Facebook friends with this Andy guy, except we haven't interacted with him at all. We just was like, now do we unfriend him? So we just kind of forgot about it. And so my son's at school. He's 13. He's at school, and he's at school lunch talking to his buddy, and one of them brings up being gay or whatever. I don't really know which, and they're both kind of feeling it out, and they're asking each other, like, how would you know if you were gay? So they start to have these conversations, so it turns out his friend is gay. He realizes through their conversation that he's gay, and my son, he thought, okay, maybe I'm bisexual, maybe that's what this is, right? And so until one day he was walking, their whole class walks a half a mile on Fridays to this little yogurt shop, and he's going into the yogurt shop and he sees two men inside a car, and one's about to get out, and he leans over and kisses the other man for like a 2.5 second kiss. It's obviously a romantic kiss, but not a lot. And he saw it first time he'd ever seen that, and he stops in his tracks, and he's like, he was confused, but not in the way you would think. He was confused because it made sense. He was like, for the first time in his life, he saw two people kissing that made sense. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but this is why I'm a huge proponent of having gay characters represented on Disney and different shows, because you have these kids who are struggling, and they don't know what to look for. They can't figure it out on their own, and they need an example to see. It's not making straight kids gay, but it's helping these gay kids develop at the same pace as their peers. And that was the case for my son. I mean, he never been around gay people. That's on us as parents, right? Because we didn't have gay friends because we were Mormon.
Also says something about the bravery of your son or other people like him, because I went to school where I don't remember there being any out gay teenagers, and we were not in a community where some church was telling us it was wrong. And nobody has cared about religion in Scandinavia for decades, right?
Yeah. And it's still hard to come out, huh? Even
Yeah,
that. Wow.
and nobody in our school was out, and considering the community you were in, like that takes some balls. I guess kids aren't that afraid. They don't know what it means to be courageous because they haven't experienced disappointment so many
Yeah,
times yet, right?
he has no idea. I mean, and he and his friend. I mean, my son didn't know he was gay at that point. I mean, it was just the two of these two guys talking, and trying to figure it out. I mean, they're seventh grade, right? They're 12, 13 years old, trying to figure out the world. And so he comes home, and we don't know this. So my wife and I were home, and later we don't he's not allowed to have a computer in his room, at bedtime. Back in that age, we're kind of protecting him from stuff, and so he would wait for us. So this week he would wait for us to go to sleep, and then he would like set his alarm, and he'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he'd sneak out, and he'd get our laptop, and he'd bring it to his room, and then he started to text or Facebook message Andy. I mean, he's a 12-year-old talking to a 21-year-old, right? And he's like, "Hey, what's up?" And I imagine if I'm a 21-year-old getting a "Hey, what's up" from a 12-year-old, from my ex heterosexual's, wife's sister's kid, whatever, like, what is this about? And so he does a couple lines, and then he says, "Hey, I wanted to ask you something," And he's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" And he said, "How do you know you're gay?" And as every person in the gay community knows, if somebody asks you that, okay, they're obviously questioning and trying. Andy was great. He didn't push him. He didn't suggest anything. He just let, my son's name is John. He let John follow his own questions, his own line of thinking. And after a couple of days of talking like this, like really late, because Andy lived in Utah, so there's a 2-hour time difference. So at the end of it, John was like, okay. First he thought he was bisexual. He goes, okay, yeah, I'm gay. And the very next thing that Andy wrote, the very next thing was, you need to go tell your parents right now, like right now. And he goes, well, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He, okay, well, tell them first thing in the morning, like when you get up. which is the best advice ever, right? And so he didn't do that in the morning, but he went to school that day and then came home, and we were in the middle of moving, and so we were like steam cleaning our carpets, and I was downstairs running water up and down, and the carpet cleaner went off for like 10 minutes. I was like, what's going on? We had a system going. I went up there, and my son is sitting on the edge of the bed, trembling, like somber, like somebody died. And my wife is looking at me like she's shocked. I'm like, what is going on? And he had just come out to her. But he Googled 101 ways to come out to your parents, because he's kind of a funny, goofy kid. He doesn't. He's like, whatever, I'm gay, I don't care. And so he decided on a game of hangman, and he put his sentence was, I am like Andy. That was this thing that he had my wife
Ah,
guess. And we've been watching the Office, the American version of the Office, and they have the character Andy, and we've been watching it together, and my wife was like, from the Office, and he was like, no, no, then he wrote the word gay at the top, and he's like, oh, Andy,
yeah.
and then it hit him suddenly. As soon as he did that, something in his mind suddenly told him, oh, I shouldn't be so comfortable. I shouldn't be okay with this. He was fine with it. He didn't care. Um, and anyway, and my wife was awesome. I mean, she loved him right away, right at the beginning. Within a couple hours, she went to the closet later that night. And this is the moment that will launch everything about my story right here. Is she went to the closet to like pray, and be like, or gather herself. Now what, right? There's so many things to figure out. Just being gay alone is one thing, but we live in North Carolina, which was a horribly conservative state and one of the worst for. They're known for being anti-trans. They did a lot of bills that are laws that hurt the LGBT community, and so we're in this state, and we have this religion that doesn't add up. We love our son, and she's just trying to get a grasp on it. So she goes in the closet, she like prays, and she says she started to feel she started to feel like protective, like a mama bear, right? But she said she felt bigger than that. Like she had scales and like talons and could breathe fire. Like you come after my son, I'm gonna
Yeah.
Game of Thrones dragon you or whatever. And so she said she felt like a mama dragon. Which is more suitable. And so literally the next day, John, our son, he's like, hey, I'm gonna tell people tomorrow at school. And we're like, whoa, we freaked out. Like, hang on a second. Cause he was like, I'm fine. He's like, God knows it, it's cool. Not a big deal. But we're worried about all the people that you can't predict. We're worried about him getting shoved in lockers. He's a really skinny kid, and we wanted to protect him. So we convinced him. I said, okay, it was almost the end of the school year. It was the end of March. We convinced him to not say anything at school for the next month and a half, and then we would come out like at church over the summer. And then when you come to school next year, some people may already know, and it'll be a little bit easier transition. That was kind of what we decided might be the best play, but we didn't really know, and we had no idea what to predict, and so that was what we did, and he's okay, and so that's what we agreed on. And then he went to school, and then he came home that very next day after deciding that, which is the day after he came out, and he goes, so I told two people today, and we're like, oh hell, he's gonna come out, and we need to figure out how to we didn't know what to expect. We need to figure out how to control the parts that might hurt him. We wanted to protect him, is all. We were kind of okay that he was gay. I mean, being a man and growing up being a little bit conservative, I definitely had gay friends, and I say that carefully because I had gay friends before that would tell you that I was their friend. I know people say that, people are like, oh, I have a black friend, I have a whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
but they're like, yeah, but
I,
would those people call you their friend?
but still, like in your world in general, for us observers from the outside, this wasn't like something. It wasn't like in a, I don't know, a fundamentalist Muslim country where they claim homosexuality doesn't exist in our country. Like there were gay people who you knew and they were in your life other than Andy, right? Like
Yeah,
there were
yeah.
gay people.
Yeah, I didn't know any in North Carolina. There was a guy from high school that I thought was probably gay, and then turns out he was, but we weren't that close. But there was a guy from my Mormon mission that was gay, and then he had come out, and he and I had stayed Facebook friendly like after that, and then one of my the the missionaries, we go in twos, whatever, and they call him companion. One of my companions, he had a roommate after our missions who was gay, and I hung out with him all the time. I mean, he and I went down to Hollywood together, and in Southern California, we hung out, and so and he was probably like 26 years old or whatever, and I was like 19, or I was like 20. I was a kid, so I had these experiences with gay people. I was a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm as a person, I'm more humanity trumps everything else. So if I'm uncomfortable with it, I'm not going to act like I'm uncomfortable if it would might make somebody else uncomfortable that that I am. So yeah, I'm like I just lean into it. I'm like, okay, this guy's gay, not for me. I'm a little bit. Please don't kiss anybody because I've got my own. I don't want to see it kind of attitude, right? Like a homophobic whatever. And so, but I was fine being being around him, but and talking like normal. And he took me into these like downtown Hollywood like sex shops and stuff. He was like trying to rile me up. So I thought it was funny, but so that was
Yeah.
we had a banter, and so my son comes out, and so we decided that uh, we're gonna write, because when you come out with social media, you have to come out to your church community, your school community, our immediate family, like regional family, and then like my ex she had like 16, 17 brothers and sisters, whatever, and they're all over the country, and uh, so then you have to come out to all of them, and like you have to come out like over and over, right, again and again. So we decided, okay, we're gonna do this once. We want to be able to frame it the way we want to, and so we together wrote a coming out letter on his behalf, and it was mostly about our experience. It was like, John's gay. Here's mine and Meg's thoughts, right? So we weren't speaking on his for him, but and so that's where Meg said that she wrote in there that that she felt like a mama dragon. She described how that feeling when she went to the closet, and so I wrote the letter.
Sorry, you had this immediate instinct to go with your son, even though we're talking about people who are still believing some of the doctrines we talked about earlier, and you're fully still living in the church's
Mhm.
lifestyle, but your immediate instinct is not to do some kind of shunning of your son or hiding it or telling him not to tell. The opposite. You're going straight into we're on his side, and the church can go do what it does, to itself.
Yeah, we had. I didn't even think about that. I wasn't. I mean, I knew. I was like, the church is gonna be a problem, but we're gonna deal with that next week. I mean, right now we're like 4 days in.
Yeah.
We haven't. Sunday hasn't even come around yet. So I write this letter out, and I include some statistics, suicide statistics. I include some stuff to try to educate, because I know everybody's going to be reading this in our community that we reach, from liberal people to that I went to high school with, to Mormons, to family. Everybody that I know would be reading it. And so we decided we are going to post on Facebook, because that seems kind of weird, but at the same time, I couldn't think of a better way where you could put it where everybody sees it at once, and then it's reshareable, so we still control the narrative, right? So it's always in our words, and so we thought that would be the smartest way to do it. So I was at work and she was at home, and we're on the phone. We type out the whole thing in a post. It's pretty long, and then I created a blog. This is when blogs were really popular. I created a brand new blog just for the post, so I'd have a link, because it was a lot. It was just a lot in the Facebook post. And we were on the phone together, and we're like, all right, 1, 2, 3. And it was like, post is how we did it, like in the afternoon. And then we just like sat back and we were waiting for it. And the response was great. Everybody was like, oh, we love you, all this stuff. But our Mormon family they were supportive, because they thought that we were going to raise him to not be gay, you know, like
Mm.
we love you for this challenging time kind of thing. But so everyone was kind until they realized that. And then my wife I mean, it took her 24 hours, and she's like, I'm out. It didn't matter. Everything she learned her whole life, she was like, I'm done. For me, it was much different. I had to, I served a 2-year mission. I taught people, I'd baptized people. I'd like been a lot more indoctrinated, and most of I mean, it's a major patriarch-led religion. So the men are typically more involved. So I had a lot more in it. And I was like slowly unturning every rock. I'm like, every single thing I taught, I learned. I had to go like look at it carefully, for like 2 days, and then okay, I understand that now. I'll move on to the next thing. I was um, very intentional about it, and she was just like, I'm gone. So it takes the average Mormon, I guess they say, like 7 years when they first have that doubting thought or be willing to look to leave. And it took my wife a week, and it took me about 3 months. And so we left quick, and part of that was, I mean, she pushed me out. I mean, she made me. I had to go faster than I probably would have liked, but it was good. I'm glad I did it the way I did. This is why I learned all about whale eggs and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, so that was him coming out, and then that's when we discovered that there was a whole ex-Mormon community, and then there was also an ex-Mormon gay community that was substantial. And so we found them, and we were shocked to say, and I'll kind of finish up here, is we were shocked to find out that there was about 8 months earlier there was a 14-year-old boy who had just come out, but he wasn't doing very well, but and other than him, we were unable to find another single teenage boy in this ex-Mormon community, which had like 80,000 people in it across the country, who was a teenager who was out and gay, who was open and out and gay. So it didn't exist. And so my son was a little bit of an anomaly there. So him and this other kid who had just come out like 8 months earlier was like super excited that there was another kid his age that was going to be part of the community, because everybody else is like 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old gay men in this community, or women, or whatnot. And so I have to say this for audience purposes. My son makes me do this. He goes, Dad, just say gay. He's like, you be inclusive at the beginning, but just say gay. The lesbians, the trans, everybody knows you're talking about them. I'm being mindful of that. But so anyway, so there's one other person.
You could tell your son that funny Uncle Danny just says the alphabet, folks. All the letters.
Is that what
all
you
the
say?
letter
That's amazing.
Yeah. Just say the alphabets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, queer is my favorite word, and they've reclaimed it, which I'm so glad, because it's a strong word and I like it.
Hey, yeah, it used to be a bad word when we were kids.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you're
So
a bit older than I am, but still, even in my time. So, quick question. There's so much I want to ask, but any kind of conversion therapy thing that Mormons tried to push on you? Because I know that in like evangelical Christian communities, they have those crazy fucks who are trying to like convert gays back to God.
Yes, and this is more than a podcast. This is a whole series of podcasts to cover this. There are organizations in the church. They go deep, and they are very. I can't even get into it right now. And I have friends that I met in this community who had been through it, and they were like in therapy, recovering out of it, and it was awful. And BYU had it on campus as late as the 90s. I think they had shock therapy. BYU in the 90s. Most of the rest of the world had got rid of that in the 70s. So it was bad. I mean, it was really, really bad. But none of that was pushed on us when we left the church, and we never looked back. And so we went from one community to another community, and to the ex-Mormon gay community.
Yeah. Cool. So you have since met with a Mormon Apostle. What's that? And you and your wife met with them to ask some questions.
Yeah. So one of the apostles. So the Mormon Church, set up. They have a prophet at the head, and then they have 12 apostles. And they try to mimic it after Christ's church from the New Testament, right, with 12 apostles. And so these are the highest of highest, ranking officials, if you will, and they're all usually like over 80 years old, and super successful people. And so I found out that one of them had a brother that was gay, openly gay, and had been for a while, and had been with a partner for 10 or 15 years, and had been excommunicated from the church willingly, because he knew in the 80s he came out to his family. And he goes, "Hey, I'm gay. I'm going to be gay. I'm going to leave the church. Just go ahead and kick me out now," because that's what would have happened. And so he left the church when he was younger, like in his 20s, maybe 30, and he lived his life as a gay man, like in Boston. And so I found out about him, and I met him, and he and I kind of talked a little bit, and then I get a message from him on Facebook like a couple of weeks after he and I kind of like hit it off, and he said, "Hey, I was talking to my brother, the Apostle, last week, and I told him about your guys' story, and he was really fascinated to hear that there was a this is crazy, that there was one openly out gay minor or youth in the Mormon church who also was not feeling like shame and guilt and like suicidal. He was just confident and was like, I'm gay, it's cool, and he wanted to talk to us about that and what his life was like and how we raised him, and maybe to learn some stuff. And we're like, okay, that's cool. Usually people are going to see the Apostle to seek wisdom from them, right? And we were like on our way out of the church at that point, but he wanted to come talk to us. I was like, this is cool. And so yeah, we did that, and it was about an hour meeting, and I'll just tell two parts of it that are, and this will tell you everything you need to know about my wife and what you need to know about me and how we handled the activism. She talked to him about in California they had a bill that was trying to pass called Prop 8. It was Proposition 8, and it was to rewrite their constitution and have marriage between a man and a woman only. All right, and this was 2009, 10, or 12, maybe, to somewhere in there, a couple years before we were there. And they were telling they were announcing at a church, telling Mormons to go door to door in California and ask people to vote for the proposition to make marriage between a man and a woman. And people were doing it, and a lot of Mormons are liberal leaning out in California, and so they're going door to door, and some of them aren't okay with it, but they've kind of been asked to do it. And this brings up your point about why actually it's a valid point about why Mitt Romney maybe shouldn't be the president, because these people that they went out knocked door to door against their better judgment and were kind of pushing to go anti-gay, and this one family went out there with their kid, the other kid that was a year older than my son, and he was knocking doors, knowing he was closet gay at the time, knocking doors with his family, telling people to vote anti-gay, and he'd go home and just cry every night because he was like, my life is over. And so the Mormon Church pushed hard to pass that, and they got their members to do it, and this kid was suicidal, and he could have died if his mom ended up reading his diary and found out that he was gay, and they came and made him come out, and they loved him, and they left the church like right away. But and so my wife brings this up to the Apostle, and she said, basically saying, what you guys did, you guys meaning not the church, you 12 men who decided to do this, what you guys did was awful. It was harmful. It hurt people, and people died from it. I mean, there was certainly over the course of the years, there was enough trauma done where, the suicide rate and everything among that demographic is as high as it is. And so he was like, well, we didn't know what to do. And she said, you have blood on your hands. And he's like, what can I do? And she goes, no, you, and she's called him Todd. Nobody calls him by, she goes, you, Todd Christofferson, you have blood on your hands. You should have stood up. You know better. You have a gay brother. And she goes to getting mad at him. And these guys are not used to being mad at. They're used to being worshipped, And she's blaming him for all the deaths that he caused in California for this policy. And I'm sitting over here going, oh my God, And I mean, 'cause just 4 months ago, like, we revered these men, and now, I'm like, wow. So I was like, wow.
How
I mean,
quickly the house of cards, when it starts falling, it falls quickly. By the way, I would love to see, and not to shit on the Catholics here specifically, but just as an example, I would like to see a Catholic cardinal say that about certain popes who have said things about AIDS or not using condoms and things like that.
God,
so
recent.
Yeah.
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 It's
Well,
like in the
and
2000s still, yeah.
now the Pope's a conservative guy from Chicago. Let's see what comes out of his mouth.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
So now you're out. I'm assuming there's a pride parade happening. Something. Are you shock and awing yourself into liberal modern life, or are you going bit by bit?
Yeah. So actually, this was August that we went with the Apostle. There's a big ex-Mormon alphabet people conference. Right? Is that how you say it? The alphabet people?
Yeah.
Or
something.
Yeah.
Whatever.
in Utah in September. And so we were going to go out there, and so that's when we met with the apostle to line it all up, so we could meet all these people in person that we'd kind of become friends with, digitally through social media. And so, but prior to that, in the June, just a couple months before, when we were only like 2 months in, we, the pride was hitting me. Of course, I knew pride was a thing. I didn't know much about it, but and then so my wife was like, "Hey, we're going to go march in Pride. We're just going to go or watch it or something." And I was like, "Okay, I'm not ready. I'm focused on my identity, my identity in the universe, because now I'm questioning my religion. I'm having that whole like crisis, and now my wife is like, we're going to go march in a pride parade. I'm like, oh yeah, but I just found out that the core of who I was now like just drifting away. And now she wants to go march in a pride parade, and I'm gonna just bull through it too. Like I'm just all right, we're gonna do this. We'll see what happens. And she's like, it's DC, it's mild on the East Coast. People whatever. Okay, whatever. And so we marched. We didn't attend. I've never attended one. I've only ever walked, and I've been to maybe 17 or so at this point. And so we go and we're marching with a group. It's called Affirmation. I can't remember they had a slogan, but so we're marching with a group, and it's Mormons. It's Mormons that are they're just, it's like an apology tour. We're walking to say, hey, we love you. It's Mormons that love gay people, basically. So we're marching with no purpose other than we're walking as Mormons in the gay pride parade with love, and we want to share with everybody. That's kind of the whole purpose of it. And we're right behind this raised flatbed truck where there's about 25 just ripped African American models wearing tidy whities, and there's like 25 of them, and they're like 3 inches apart from each other, and they're on top of this flatbed, and that's their float. It's just a bunch of these dudes up there dancing half naked, I'm like, and this is my shock, because I'm not I'm not used to any of that, and I go behind me, and it's about 30 Filipinos in drag, and they're colorful, massive, like just huge costumes, right? And we're sandwiched in between them, and we're supposed to look like Mormons, so we dress in like a tie. We dress like it's Sunday, so we're trying to look our part. And we start walking, and we do the march, and we're handing out stickers that say, "I was hugged by a Mormon," and which was a campaign that's been going on for a long time. And now I had no problem like hugging people, but I was really apprehensive about just diving in like this is a party. This isn't my party. I'm uncomfortable as it is. I'm still figuring out who Jesus is in my mind, and I got to go do the gay thing now too. And my wife had just left it. She was like all in just overnight, and it wasn't that quick for me. And so we're walking, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like, fuck it, and I'm gonna go do this. I grabbed a booklet of stickers, and I just went with it, because I'm a very outgoing person, and I'll talk to anybody. And I was like, all right, we're gonna do this like I don't know, I'm at a carnival, and I'm running the show, and I'm trying to get people, whatever. Just go talk to everybody and hand out stickers, and that's what I did. And I started hugging people, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun, just hugging, giving out things, and people were like in tears, because we were one of the most oppressive religions that they've had to deal with in their lives, and here we are.
Hey, the church trained you well for this sales job. You're a
Right? Yeah,
missionary. You know
yeah,
how to go talk to a
exactly.
stranger,
Yeah,
right?
but there's like 17 of us in our little group, and there's like seven. There's like, wow, there's 17 Mormons in all of the East Coast that like gay people. Sweet, we're all here, and it's a start. It's kind of how it felt, and then, but the thing, there's a moment though, that one moment in that parade is what did it for me, and it made any homophobia, any issue I might have had or thing I needed to figure out vanish. And it was so we're walking, and you get to the point, you're walking down the parade, and you start to eye in on people on who you want to go hug, right? Like before, like who needs it the most? Who would I want to talk to? Who do I want to avoid? Who's going to go grab my butt when I go up there? Like what's which who am I? What? And you're deciding, and you had a lot of fun doing that. And you could walk through the crowd and go up you could go behind people and go into the crowd and stuff. So I saw this. So I'm about 50, 60 yards out, and it's packed on the sides. And there's this guy standing up on a tree that's kind of raised up, and he's a good 8 to 9 feet behind the crowd. and he's wearing just like some skimpy little shorts and nothing else. The guy's probably 23, 24 years old, really good looking guy, and he just he's just watching, no expression. He's just watching, and I'm trying to like figure him out, as I'm doing hugs left and right, but I'm always have my eye on him, and I was like, I'm drawn to him for whatever reason. And so when we get up there, I kind of fight through the crowd, and I go right up to him. He sees me coming, and he doesn't know what, and I said, can I give you a hug? And he was like, oh my god, and he holds me, and we embrace, and I mean the hug couldn't have been more than 6 seconds, but it felt like it was 2 hours, because what he relayed to me in those 6 seconds was that he was a Mormon 24-year-old. He was openly gay. He'd served a Mormon mission, and when he came home, he told his parents that he was gay, and they like kicked him out, and he was thinking about taking his life last night because of this. And he goes, nope, I'm gonna go to Pride, and then I'm gonna do it. I want to have one more good day. And he says, you guys being here has saved my life.
Yeah. Well, that's really amazing, but it doesn't go that well for everyone, right? Your son had a friend who unfortunately did commit suicide, right?
That's true. Yeah. So with this guy and I separated, we're both like in tears, and that was the moment I'm like, in that moment I was like, all right, I'm in. Seeing a measurable change in that moment, I'm like, all right, I'm on. And then I knew, and then I was like, okay, now I knew it doesn't matter what I wanted to do or what didn't want to do. I knew I was going to be an activist, and I knew I was going to go hard with it, because I don't really know how to do things halfway. And so that's when that started, and then everything else went on. And yeah, and then as time went on, yeah, there were some other youth that were coming out, and there was one kid named, I'll name him for respect for him, is this one kid named Stockton Powers. He lived in Bountiful, Utah, which is heavily, it's like 92% Mormon or something like that. And he was openly gay, kind of has some struggles with some, not super happy, but loved these conferences that we did like semi-annually, because he'd get to see his friends, get to see his friends from Arizona or California or whatever, and we'd all go up there and hang out, and and my son was like in love with them, and they just were inseparable and really close. And so they knew each other for like a year and a half, and we were supposed to have them come down and live with us like for a summer, and we're trying to get the details worked out, and then we get we get a phone call from somebody in the community, and she says that she called my wife, and she said that Stockton had killed himself that morning, and we didn't have any details. And my wife, we actually worked together at the time, and so she got that call at work, and she came up to me and got me, and she gave me the news, and we were just like, oh my gosh. And so she literally quit her job that day, and we decided that she'd stay home until he was out of high school, to make sure if he needed whatever, because this was going to devastate him, and it did. And so sad as that is, it prompted a couple things that were really kind of cool. I mean, a whole movement kind of started because of him, and there were some artists, some famous people got involved. I mean, Dan Reynolds of Imagine Dragons kind of heard the story, and I don't know if Tyler Glenn for Neon Trees. Tyler was just recently openly come out as a gay Mormon, or now ex-Mormon, and then Dan Reynolds was just a white cis straight guy who had compassion for the gay community in the Mormon church. So he was like still a Mormon, but he started a yearly concert called Live Love Loud or Love Loud or something, and it takes place in Utah every year. And there's performances, but there's also stories and stuff that are being told, and Stockton's parents were heavily involved in getting that off the ground, which was really kind of neat. But the thing though that really started, that really kind of pushed us even there before that is, I mentioned that when we did our coming out letter, we wrote in my wife's self-described experience about feeling like a mama dragon. That's how she felt, like a mama bear wasn't strong enough. And you had all these women that she'd never met were like reaching out to her and asking her like, oh my gosh, you described me perfectly. That's how I feel about my kid, And they were asking her permission would you be okay if I called myself a mama dragon too, you know? And so she's like, oh yeah, whatever. She just, it's just a metaphor or whatever. And so it kind of caught on. There are 6 8 9 women, right? And they start to be mama dragons, and then they form a Facebook group and they just call it Mama Dragon. They really didn't know what they were doing. And then over the next year, they grew to 100, 150 people. And then, because as we know, moms are so much more loving typically than dads, it takes us a while. And then it started to happen. My wife would come to me and she would say, hey, so and so's husband was like, hey, I want to be a Mama Dragon, but it's only for women. And we're like, yeah, that sucks. And then that kept happening a couple of times and they kept all getting referred to me. And so I called everybody up and I said, let's start a group, and I called it Dragon Dads. And so there was 5 of us. I mean, we were talking to each other on Facebook, and I added 5 people in the group and threw like a rainbow flag on the cover and found a picture of a dragon and post on the way. And then for a year and a half, I mean, nobody posted, nobody did anything. We got to like 12 people. And what didn't do anything. It was just a place where we could see where the other dads were, you know. And so after 2 years or whatever, it was there's like 30 of us, hardly any, and we just met people at other pride festivals, or whatever, and people would want to join. And we were very very careful about vetting people too, because we the purpose of the group was, it wasn't for the kids, it was for the dads. And so we were a support group for the dads to help dads not be assholes to their gay kids. And so everybody had some sort of conservative upbringing, and everybody was dealing with unlearning some homophobia and struggling with this. And so we'd have these conversations sometimes that were like real, deep, about like, one person would say, I can't stand it when I see my son kiss his boyfriend. I have to leave the room, and I don't want to be that way. Like, what do you guys do? And he's a super activist, but he can't say that publicly because he'll get reamed for it. So this was a very safe space for some of these dads to become better. And so we'd get advice from stuff. And that's kind of what the group is about. And then of course, if we're better dads, then the trickle down effect is our kids are in a happy home and a loving home, and we're not saying anything wrong.
I'll say it out loud, no problem. There's quite a lot of straight men who have no problem with and support gay rights, but don't want to watch men kissing, and that's it's okay to say that out loud. I don't, people like what they like. You can't make people like watching something,
I agree, and we forget too. I mean, the LGBT movement has been, on like light speed as far as like progression in the last 10 years. And so every year it was like 10 or 15 years of progress based on the previous. And so, we got from the beginning of this journey for me, it was like Obama was even against gay marriage. Like that was the temperature on the nation. Your liberal president was anti-gay marriage, right? And so that's where we started. And then within 3 or 4 years, the Supreme Court passed it where it was legal, and we were all like part of that. We got to see it and hopefully have a little bit of an influence on it. And but yeah, so that was a group. And then I'm back at work one day and I get this random phone call on my cell phone, and I didn't recognize the number, which I don't usually take, and I answered it anyway. And this woman says, and I could get it almost word for word. She goes, "Hi, is this Jake?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "My name's Julia Putman. I'm an executive producer for Facebook." And this is a Monday morning, by the way. And she goes, "Last Friday, I had my monthly one-on-one with Mark Zuckerberg, and Mark, she's calling him Mark." She goes, "And Mark stumbled upon your Facebook group, and he's really really interested about it, and he wants to send a crew down to Arizona and film you and maybe some of the other members to see about what it's all about and how it started." And I have the phone in my ear and I'm thinking, there's 32 people in this group. There's like 400,000 Facebook groups out there in the world, right? I mean, come on. I was like, this is, and I'm like, I literally said, Julia Putman. I said, who is it? Who is this really? I said that. And she says, "I'm Julia Putman." She's very professional. And she repeated it. And sure enough, that's what happened. Facebook was doing this internal morale booster thing where they would highlight some Facebook groups that were out there that of people that were connected that would never possibly would be able to know each other had Facebook not existed. And so the 31 of us would never know each other if it wasn't for Facebook. And so they came down and shot the video, and then they came back to Pride. They came back to watch Salt Lake Pride a month later, and they put the 3-minute video together, and then they showed it to the Facebook employees as a morale booster to say, hey, look what all your hard work's doing. This is what these people are doing, and none of it would be possible without Facebook. And then they held on to the video for like a year. Didn't play it anywhere, and it played at the Cannes Film Festival in France. It played in like 17 film festivals around the world over the course of a year. And then it finally was like released. And the way they released it, Mark Zuckerberg shares that stuff from his personal account, and then it gets shared that way. So it's
That when NBC caught wind as well, the Today Show?
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, it's now we're on like a marathon. It's been 5-6 years of this, and it's becoming. I mean, my son's like now out of high school. You know, he actually dropped out of school, but he couldn't after the death of his friend, and then got his GED, and now he was done with school, and things have kind of like settled a little bit more. But we're still like, if you have a fraction of any kind of empathy, to be able to listen to these stories that you hear over and over and over again, it just tears you up. You just can't. You have to take breaks from it, you know, because you hear everybody's stories, and when I've done a bunch of podcasts, and so people are reaching out to me on Facebook like specifically and sharing their story, and these 60-year-old men are sending me messages like when I'm 40 years old, and they're acting like I'm the dad that they always wanted but they never had, right? And it's just I don't know these people, and it was brutal. It was just brutal. It's hard to, and I was like, I need to take a break from this, and then NBC calls, and and they wanted to put together a segment for Father's Day, and they wanted to highlight our group. And so they flew a team out to Salt Lake and interviewed a bunch of us, and then they flew me to New York. And so yeah, we did the interview, and yeah, it was wild. And so after that, shortly after, I think our group now has about 3,000 people, 3,000 dads.
Yeah. So this is called Dragon Dads on Facebook, yeah?
Dragon Dads, yep. And I'm off it. I'm completely out of it, but I know the guys. Sometimes they'll get my input on stuff. But we founded it based on it being support group for dads to help dads be better dads.
That's incredible, man. And I understand what you're saying about that you're a bit out of it, taking a back seat and all that, and so much attention starts once you start appearing publicly, then you're subjecting your family and yourself to a
Hmm.
whole different
Yeah.
thing online and all of that. And I'm not even talking about the haters. It's just the pressure of being the voice of something. And yeah, I get it. I have bouts when I want to speak up on something, but then I also have you can look at this show, like suddenly I just want to talk about nonsense for
Yeah. Yeah.
like I don't want to go.
And and it chose us. Like we didn't choose it either. It chose us. And I had that moment in the Pride Parade with this guy, and I knew it. I was like, this is going to be my life. I just knew it. Something told me, um, this is it. And I just kind of lean into it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty wild. But then but yeah, my marriage didn't survive it either. It was very, very difficult. And it's when you come out of religion and you land on the other side. I was married 20 years, and we were happy. People don't say that very much. We had a good marriage. You come out on the other side, and you're not. Your identity has changed, and compatibilities kind of change, and people change, and yeah, it didn't last. We got our son. We got our son graduated, and once he was off and safe, then we went our separate ways too. And then um, I actually took a job. I actually moved to Fargo, North Dakota, and to grow cannabis for a living. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. We would all love you to come back and we can start with that. The cannabis growing in Fargo and everything and all the stuff we didn't maybe cover about Mormonism. But I want to end this conversation kind of your relationship with God and community now, because we talked a lot about like we can both agree that we need community. Your
Hmm.
marriage isn't there anymore. Your son's out of the house soon, if not already. Where do you go for community if not a church, or is it a different Christianity, or what do you do?
I have dug deeply into being a Mormon. I was
Ketamine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of. No, as a Mormon, I was a very obedient Mormon. I knew how to follow the rules, right? But I didn't feel that spiritual. I would have spiritual experiences, but I didn't feel like a spiritual person. I feel like a rule follower. When I left Mormonism, I was able to find spirituality without without religion in the way, and so and found that a lot through meditation and listening to a lot of like philosophy, like Sam Harris's and even like Alex O'Connor's out there, and so and yes, I have. Um, looked at everything down from all different kinds of vipassana meditation. You've got philosopher Sam Harris, like listening to that. Some psychedelics, I mean, anything to kind of help expand the mind and try to see what's truth. Because what I can no longer trust and what I've learned is I can't trust my brain to be able to identify truth because I believed something that wasn't true for 40 years. And so that was one of the most, you would say embarrassing, but that's one of the most surprising, unsettling things I found out about myself because I'm not a naive person. When you're brought up in something though, it takes a lot longer to unbelieve it. So
Yeah.
credit to my son for coming out. He gave me
I
my life.
mean,
Yep.
yeah, incredible story, man, and hopefully we'll get more if you have the energy to talk about it and in the future. All of this has been a massive public service announcement. We'll put all the links you want in the show notes to Dragon Dads and all that for people who need help. Do you have anything else?
No, no, that's really it. No, I appreciate the time, and yeah, I look forward to talking to you again for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'll say if you haven't been, go to a pride parade because you might find that it's just your teacher and your neighbor and yeah, you don't need to like seeing men kissing to enjoy a good party, you know?
Yeah, and if you've only
All
been
right.
and never marched, march. It's a whole nother experience. It's amazing.
Ah, cool. All right. Thanks so much, Jake. Awesome.
Thanks, Danny.
Cheers.
Take care.